gospel. So today I'm going to introduce a very short little kind of beginning of the summer series. It might be broken up in one or two places. I don't know if my buddy Nathan Bell is here, my podcast host and dear friend. He's from New Hampshire. Lisa and I, for the first time, are actually vacationing in New Hampshire this summer. So New Hampshire's been on the brain, and I thought, yeah, I'm just going to use live free or die and make it work in the sermon if it doesn't or not. But I actually think this sermon series will work. Now, you know me, I always want to get our creative juices flowing with a little movie trivia. So I'm going to show you my first scene. I can't show the scene because we'd get shut down. Harrison Ford, AKA Richard Kimball. I didn't kill my wife. The movie? Fugitive. Good. Anybody know the year? 93. Very good. That was me and Lisa's first date. August 14th, 93. And that movie worked its magic so well, we got married August 13th, 94, a year later. So Fugitive to me, I hold dear to my heart. Harrison Ford is playing Richard Kimball, the man who did not kill his wife, who has managed to escape, not really prison, but the bus that was taking him to prison in the accident. And Sam Gerard, who is the U.S. Marshal, is hunting him down. So this is the scene. You remember he's standing before the water pipe, right? He's got nowhere to go. And he just wants this U.S. Marshal to know I didn't kill my wife. Anybody remember what Tommy Lee Jones' response was? Oh, see, everybody knows it. You're not even easy to fool. One of my favorite lines in cinematic history, I don't care. Ooh. But when you see it in the context of the movie, he shouldn't care. He is the embodiment of the law, right? And a lot of people have said that the original TV show in the 60s and then the movie in the 90s is basically just a modern retelling of Les Mis. You remember Javert or Russell Crowe's Javert? Man, Russell, you hit on almost every front. Then you did that one. Hey, let me sing contra Hugh Jackman. Anyway, and Anne Hathaway. I'm sorry, I'm digressing. But basically, if you remember, Javert is the man who's got one job. He's the law. He has to bring in Jean Valjean. That's it. That's what he's going to do. That's his only job. But Jean Valjean needs mercy. He needs understanding. Richard Kimball needs somebody to understand. And Tommy Lee Jones, why would you possibly think I would care? And I thought that'd be a good way for us to be thinking about how we understand the law of God. And I think, I've been a pastor now almost 30 years. I've been a Jesus follower for almost 40. And I don't think I myself live out of this reality enough. And I'm certainly sure many people often confuse law and gospel, and it's a recipe for a mess and a disaster. So let's ask the question, how should we think about God's law as followers of Jesus? Right, to kind of hang our thoughts on a peg, I'll use 1 Timothy 1, verse 8. Paul, an apostle, a leader in the early church, wrote these words to his young apprentice, Timothy, a young kind of missionary pastor. He said, now we know that the law is good if, do you notice that if? One uses it lawfully. The law could be used poorly, or it could be used wisely. The law is good. I don't want to suggest that the law is a problem. God's law. What's its role in the life of the Christian? That's what we're really asking in this series. So let me go to another letter Paul wrote, the book of Romans. And he says this in Romans chapter 7, verse 12. So the law is holy. I want us to see it. The law of God is holy. The commandment is holy and righteous and good. This is a very important thing we would understand foundationally. God's rule book, his expression of what we need to do and not do, is righteous and good. So I don't want anybody, when they hear this series, they might think, I think Dutcher's trashing the law. I am going to trash some things that you and I do quite well, but it is our misuse and misapplication of the law that I'm trashing, and I am its chief culprit. So I don't want you to think I'm bashing you. I have misused the law many, many times. I've used it to look down on people. I've used it to create a sense of arrogance and pride and self-superiority and smugness. I've got a long track record of doing those things. So I just want you to hear me on this clearly. The law itself is good and righteous and holy. And why? Well, let me take you to two places. When you think of law, if you know anything about the Bible, you probably think, where can I find the most law? You probably think of Leviticus, right? Everybody's favorite Bible study book. Let me take you there. Leviticus chapter 19. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to all the congregation of the people of Israel and say to them, you shall be holy, that is set apart, different. You should not live like the other nations, act like the other nations, behave like the other nations. Why? For I, so here's the reason, I, the Lord, your God, am holy. So his law is a reflection of his own character. When we see that God is against adultery, we learn that God hates adultery and he cherishes purity, fidelity, faithfulness, covenant loyalty, and commitment. We learn something about God by his law. So he wants the people of Israel to know, I want you to be holy because I am holy. We see this again in chapter 18, just go a chapter before. You shall follow my rules and keep my statutes and walk in them. I am the Lord your God. You shall therefore keep my statutes and my rules. If a person does them, notice, he shall live by them. I am the Lord. All right, so I just wanted to start there with the foundation. The law of God is a reflection of his holy and righteous and perfect character. So the law is always good because it tells us what God cherishes and what God despises and how our lives and hearts should be in alignment with such things, should be. Now, I want to kind of make a small pivot here, this point in the message, and I want us to consider something, and you might think, well, why is Dutcher introducing this? If you hold on, I think that my ADHD is always a threat to sabotage my own sermons. I might end up going back to The Fugitive and giving you, Harrison Ford's entire filmography, but I'm going to try not to do that. I want us to consider how similar many of the laws in what we might call the Old Testament, what those of Jewish ancestry would call their Torah, the scriptures, those Hebrew scriptures that were given to ancient Israel. I want us to consider that they overlap a lot with the ethics and values and morals of the great world religions. So much so that some people think to suggest the Christian faith is the only true faith is a great affront. We know that in our culture, right? If you want to lose friendships potentially, your influence potentially, and people find out that you may actually be a Jesus follower who believes Jesus is the only true Savior, our only true hope, that's often seen as a threat. And the response is, well, doesn't the law in Christianity, the law in Islam, the law in Judaism, and even Hinduism, and ancient Egyptian religions generally overlap on the same big stuff? Let me give you a quote by a man who's very outspoken about these things, brilliant man. He's a rabbi. I've seen him on TV a lot, perhaps you have too, and I think I have it right, Rabbi Shmuley Boteach. He has said, I am absolutely against any religion that says one faith is superior to another. I don't see how that is anything different than spiritual racism. It is a way of saying that we are closer to God than you, and that's what leads to hatred. So we think, we're thinking about the law, but maybe the rabbi here has some wisdom for us. What do we do with this? Because we're going to run into this, we probably have, when we talk to friends and family about our faith in Jesus. How does all this kind of work out? After all, the Hebrew prophet Micah kind of summarizes things for us. Many of us have probably learned Micah 6:8. Bring that up here if you would, guys. Thank you. He has told you, O man, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? To do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with our God. Now, I'll date myself. Matt and I were laughing today. We did Shout to the Lord, which, can you believe Shout to the Lord is like 35 years old? What? I mean, it's that old? Meaning I'm that old? Yes, it does. I remember, anybody remember this song? I did it when I was like in campus. It was then called Campus Crusade, but Crew now. He has shown thee, oh man, what is good. Am I the only one? Anybody remember that song? Okay, I'm going to have to sing it. You know I won't do that. It was a song I remember learning. He has shown you, oh man, what is good, what the Lord requires of you, right? And it's justice, kindness, and humility. Interestingly enough, these seem to be the big things, right? So, well, the law, I mean, that kind of works the same in all the great world religions, Greg, right? I mean, maybe the rabbi's point should hit home with us. In fact, Jesus seems to reinforce this centrality of what's most important in the law in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 23, verse 23. He says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, the religious professionals, hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin, which are little spices, and you measure out and parcel out your portion, your tenth, and you're so meticulous about it, but you've neglected the weightier matters of the law. Notice how similar it is to Micah. Justice, mercy, faithfulness. These are the things that matter. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others. So I want to step back from that and just make this observation. This is what I wrote down in my prep. We go to the next slide. Like Christianity shares similar morals and ethics with the great religions of the world. It does. It's undeniable. I mean, if you just take a look, I'll give you a little book recommendation if you want to look at it. It's not, of all his books, I put this one kind of in the middle, The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis. But what makes that, it's a good book, it is. It's a little dated now. Some of the issues he's addressing are just not our issues today. You know, it's not his fault, just the time in which he lived. But the appendix to that book is worth the whole book. And it's his collection, of which I'm just choosing a snippet, of ethics and morals found in all the religions of the world. He calls it the way of the Tao, not Taoism per se. It's his kind of catch-all phrase for a universal set of ethics that threads its way through all times and all cultures. So, what do we do as we think about the law? Because this is the angle I want to take us in today. Let's go on to the next slide here. Let's consider mercy and kindness. Obviously, the Bible has a lot to say about mercy and kindness. Jesus says in Luke 6, be merciful. Why? Well, because your Father is merciful. Remember, be holy because your Father. Be merciful. Be a person that's willing to extend kindness and grace and help and aid because that's how your Father is. Right? Well, that's got to be unique to Christianity. Well, not really. Here's an ancient Egyptian prayer. I have given bread to the hungry, water to the thirsty, clothes to the naked. It sounds very similar to Matthew 25, right? When Jesus tells the story. You know, I was hungry, you fed me. I was naked, you clothed me, etc. When did we do these things, Lord? When you took care of the poor. We took care of those that are hurting. You did it unto me. It's very similar. Another example. One should never strike a woman, not even with a flower. This is an ancient proverb, right? And we know the dangers of kind of overly masculinized, hyper-patriarchal culture where women were quite tragically treated. And here in the midst of this, you got this kind of beautiful little merciful piece of wisdom. Interesting. Let's do another example, justice. You shall not steal, right? Exodus 20, pretty cut and dried. Well, here's a document called List of Sins. Probably exciting read. Anyway, interesting. A list of sins. Anyway, to wrong, to rob, to cause to be robbed. Kind of covers all the bases, doesn't it? That's a sin. In ancient Babylonian culture, we often, if you know our Old Testament history, they're the bad guys. But in their religious documents, we actually find things that are very, very similar. One more. An ancient Egyptian confession, I have not stolen. So as the penitent prayer puts forth his heart, he says, I've not stolen, recognizing its great error. So what do we do? I mean, it's kind of all the same, right? Not quite. I wrote this down too. Yet what Jesus says about ethics is different than any religious teacher in history. And I will discuss that, hopefully respectfully, with anybody, any skeptic. If they want to sit down, meet up at Starbucks, have a cup of coffee, talk about these things, I'd love to do that. And had the privilege of doing that from time to time with people. And it's always a rewarding conversation because we can learn things, and hopefully the person we're talking to can learn things. And let me take you to Matthew chapter 5, where we'll spend the next few minutes as we work through this. Jesus says to his followers and all those who are listening by, who are peasants for the most part, uneducated folks that don't have access to money, power, influence, etc., like the majority of people were in the first century ancient world. It says, for I tell you, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. That is a radical atomic bomb that he drops there. I mean, the Pharisees, the teachers of the law, would walk around all day and they'd have these little boxes tied to their wrists called phylacteries, or often they would tie them to their foreheads. And inside of these little boxes were these miniature scrolls, which were the section of scripture that they were that day committing to memory, prayer, application, etc. I mean, if you remember, there were no chapters and verses in this ancient world. The odds are, if you sat down with a Pharisee and say, hey, could you give me the opening words to Obadiah? I hear that and I'm thinking, was that like a B track of Sam Cooke? Is that like an old, you have a song called Obadiah. I know there's one Jeremiah. I'm like, Obadiah. Oh yeah, it is a book in the Bible. Right, yeah, I know that. I'm a Christian. Can you give me, Greg, the opening words? Yes. They're in Hebrew, so I don't want to embarrass you with my great intellect. So I won't quote them. I'll let you look them up, right? That's what I would do. But, I mean, they knew it. They knew it. Their prayers were beautiful. They used words like beseech, right? Those impressive 10-cent words we pick up only in church culture. I beseech thee, Lord. I've never used beseech at Burger King. But when you're praying in church, Lord, I beseech thee, right? I'm going to beseech thee for the Bacon King this week and just see how they react. Now I'm thinking about the Bacon King. Whew. There's like 2,500 calories in that thing. I digress. So imagine the person hearing this, right? Are you kidding me? No way. No way. That's how he starts. So look at verse 21. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. He's just quoting the law of God that they know. You see it first introduced formally in Exodus 20. It's reinforced in Deuteronomy 5, and it's all threaded throughout the scriptures. About over 600 commands in the Old Testament that all are applications of what we call the 10 big ones, the 10 commandments. So you know this, you've heard that. So the person there started, oh, good. That Pharisee thing scared me for a second, but I've never murdered anybody. Good to go. Wait, look what he says next. But I tell you, and no other religious teacher in history has ever done this, that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. Ooh, again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, racha, which really just means fool, right, is answerable to the court. And anyone who says, you fool, will be in danger of the fire of hell. Now, have an older brother. I remember summer vacation, I don't know, 1980 something. My brother and I fighting like cats and dogs. And my mom came in, eyes ablazing. It was like a picture out of Revelation. And she came in and she made it crystal clear. I'm not putting up with this. And she used a word. Anyway, I'm not putting up with this for 12 weeks. So I know, summer vacation. She wasn't, and she established that authority early on, right? So if there was a day where I called my brother fool or he called me fool, that was a good day. That was a light day, right? Because we had some doozies. I mean, you're playing Stratego in the middle of summer during a rainstorm when you can't be out with your buddies. I mean, the fists are flying. So a day where we said fool, come on. That's nothing. But Jesus says, see, the root is the same. If I get to the spiritual DNA, your willingness to demean your brother is the same willingness that the murderer brings to his act. Ooh, I don't want to think about that. Jesus says, well, I'm not giving you a choice. I'm telling you that. That's how I see it, because that's how it is. And then look what he says next. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. Woo! Oh, Lord. Yeah, I mean, marriage isn't perfect, she hasn't quite learned that, there's a reason for the things I do, and that makes me right. You kind of work all this through, you rationalize everything, tongue in cheek, of course, but marriage isn't perfect, but grace, God never cheated. Oh, my wife is so thankful for that. Woo, good. It was getting kind of scary there. And then Jesus drops this. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. It says looks lustfully, entertains a thought with a woman other than his wife. And every man there is indicted. Every man here is indicted. Why? Because the DNA root is the same. It's the same. And God cares, and Jesus cares, and it matters. So he does this throughout the sermon. I'm just giving you a snippet. And just when, the crowds are, wow, this is a tough teaching, he kind of drops this in Matthew 5:48. Be perfect. Well, okay. I mean, I grew up hearing nobody's perfect, right? Nobody's perfect. The air is human, right? This is just, so he's got to be saying, we got to aim, we got to make it our goal. That's what he's saying, right? But then he qualifies what he says. I only gave you the beginning of the verse. Be perfect, and there it is again, as your heavenly Father is perfect. So let's step back and make this observation. The law of God is serious business. It insists on perfection, not strong effort. Can I say that again? What the law of God requires, if you think about the math, if the law is a reflection of God's worth, are we saying, if I give it my college try, my level best, maybe I hit about 72%. That's passing. I got a 72% in high school. I was dancing for joy. I passed. That's pretty good. And are we saying, God's worth about 72% of my obedience? You see why Jesus is saying the law is a reflection of what God is worth. And God is worth 100% total tunnel vision, never flinching, never diluted, never deviating, perfect obedience, or he is not God. That is what he is worthy of. All right, Lord, then I'm going to try it. Because we're commanded, honor this law, do this law. And then we find something that C.S. Lewis in another book captured. I think this is in my top 3 of Lewis's quotes. He said this, it's so simple but so true. No man knows how bad he is till he has tried very hard to be good. Yeah. No man knows how bad he is till he's tried very hard to be good. So I come before God. Lord, I know you're worthy of perfect obedience. I know you're worthy of it. I hear your son teach me these things. I haven't done it. I can't do it. And I suspect if you give me a mulligan and you let me start over tomorrow, I'm going to be in the same spot tomorrow. And it's true. Because that's the law's job. The law was never intended to be a ladder by which we get to heaven. Because we can't do it. It is a mirror that shows us who we are. I heard Tony Evans talk about this years ago. I love this analogy. I wish it was mine, but it's just such a good analogy. He said, when you go into the mirror of your bathroom every morning, it's usually depressing, right? It's interesting. The term cosmetics, ladies, comes from the term cosmos, which means order or, arranging. order. Why? Well, because when you look in the mirror, there's often chaos. Now, what guys do, they look in the mirror and say, I'm good. I'm going to live like that today. That's what I do. Most women, smarter than us, think, I'm going to do a few things, right? So they bring order out of the chaos. But nobody... See, Matt, the mood music didn't work right there quite yet. Ooh, Lord, did I step in it? I probably did. Please send emails to Greg Dutcher's Theological Response Team. They are Ben Dutcher and Isaac Dutcher. They respond to those things for me. I'll provide the emails for you. Evan said, nobody takes the mirror and brushes their teeth with it. Nobody takes the mirror and, well, it doesn't relate to me, combs their hair with it. Nobody takes the mirror and fixes themselves. The mirror says to us, I don't care. I'm the law. My job is to show you who you are. And you are a law breaker. And I don't like it, but this is where my life is either shipwrecked beyond all hope, or I throw myself at the mercy of God and say, well, if not the law, God, where? If not the law, where? And we're going to get to that next week, but I'm going to come in right now and just kind of say, I think you know what I'm going to say. And we're going to celebrate that in communion in a moment. I look to Jesus, who actually kept that law perfectly on my behalf, who actually gives me the gift of that perfect obedience when I put my faith in him. He gives it to me as a gift. He also pays the penalty for me breaking it. That's the gospel. That's why we need to get clear on the distinction between law and gospel. Gospel is good news for lawbreakers. It's wonderful hope for cosmic criminals like us. The Apostle Paul said this in Romans 3. He said, for by works of the law, no human being will be justified, that is, declared righteous in his sight, since through the law it has one job, knowledge of sin. I'm in great need. Give you one more quote. I've given a lot today by John Stott. Man, I never got to meet. I get to meet him one day. Brilliant writer and statesman. He said, no man has ever appreciated the gospel until the law has first revealed him to himself. It is only against the inky blackness of the night sky that the stars begin to appear, and it's only against the dark background of sin and judgment that the gospel shines forth.